Our system and our Islamic way of being, which is literally a way of life, encompasses everything, including your mental well-being, including your emotional well-being. It's not just your physical well-being, your intellectual well-being, your cognitive, right? It's not just those things. And for that reason, when you look at what happened, this is where I say the proof is in the pudding. If it was all theory, and it was all kind of scholars writing in great, beautiful books about this in theory, that wouldn't have been enough. You know, the Greeks and the Romans wrote some theory, but what you find in the Muslim world is something totally different. You find in the Muslim world that there is actually the first ever, guys, listen, the first ever psychiatric institutions in the entire world. The first ever psychiatric ward as part of a full hospital system. The first places of treatment for the mentally ill, and they are considered to be humane because all of Islamic medicine was considered to be, that was its trademark, is humane treatment of the mentally ill. Why? Because the Quran commanded it, right? And not only that, but to have, when you think about this, like how do you have in the Europe, which is at the exact same period of time in history that this is happening, the story of the Islamic Golden Ages is happening what? At the same time as the European what? Dark Ages. The exact same time of history. What was the Dark Ages? What were they categorized by? They were categorized by their jahiliyyah, right? They were categorized by a period of time where the sciences were not advanced in any way. And you have, let's take mental illness. If you had a mental illness in that period of time in European Dark Ages, you were either at worst, you were burned at the stake as a witch. And at best, you were sent over to a monastery to be treated by the priests and nuns and such because it was a spiritual, supernatural condition. So how do you have that happening in the same period of history as in the Muslim lands? You're getting a breakthrough in all of that stigma and a breakthrough in all of those advances and literally building up whole institutions of healing and treatment. And then try to tell me this wasn't something unique to Islam, something inherent inside of our Islamic faith that prompted this. Very Quranic ayat and injunctions that taught us to care for the mentally ill and taught us to seek out treatments and reminded us the hadiths that say that Allah sends down cures, so seek them out, right? And tadawu ibadallah, seek out treatments. This is what inspired that entire situation, and mental health wasn't ignored. It was part and parcel of this. So when I went back to all of this and started my own kind of line of studying, the lab actually branched out of some of my own research on this looking at the early primary manuscripts of what our scholars have said about this. I was astounded, floored, like totally taken aback, right? Because not only this whole idea of the Western construct, I was like, what Western construct? We were way ahead of the curve, way before anything Western ever came. And in fact, there is a lot of discussion and theory about how it was actually the science and humanities and development in the Muslim world that then made its way to cause the European Renaissance and Age of Enlightenment, right? It kind of spread that way. Now, the cherry on top for me is the last part of the slide here that says, how was all this funded? So if you want more proof of the pudding, it wasn't just buildings and institutions that were built. How was this funded? It was funded by our zakat system, which is so unique to the Muslim community, right? That is literally something that the Islamic governments paid out and made sure that treatment was accessible to all people that lived under its jurisdiction, Muslim and not. And not only that, by the waqf system. And then this use of the zakat to actually make sure that the Muslims were accounted for, that if they were needy in this way, they were able to seek out full support without even paying a cent or a dinar in this case, right? And not only were they not paying for it, they were actually at the end of their discharge when they left the hospital, they were given, in this case, in one hospital, 3 gold dinars, 2 of which to be able to reintegrate back into society, to start their own businesses, and 1 to be able to have their own clothing and shelter. So it's like beyond, it's like mind-boggling. It's beyond just humanistic treatment and humane medicine. It's actually a fully holistic, integrated care of the mentally ill. Now, what I didn't tell you so far, and here are some of the hospitals and where they started and what ages they were in and where you find some of the psychiatric institutions. But what's really interesting to me is the care team. Who was the care team that were taking care of these people? Because that too is telling. Was it only a medicalized model of illness and treatment? Like today, if you have a mental health condition, you access the medical world for your help and support. Well, for them, yes, it was in what we today would call a hospital system, but it was actually called a Dar al-Shifa, Bimaristan, which is basically a center of well-being and treatment, right? And it was holistic in its sense. So when you look at the care team, yes, there was a physician who had the help of a nurse, but also there was the dietitian who was very careful in making sure and ensuring the kind of diet that was custom selected for each and every illness they were treating. And you had today we call this person a pharmacist, right? A pharmacologist, somebody who would compound the medications. And yes, they had medications, literally medications, right? Where they were herbs and different things put together in their pre-modern medications and given. And then you had the person who today we might call a social worker, mashallah, who literally was the person who helped that patient when they came into the hospital to be able to have what they needed while they were there during their stay. And upon their discharge, again, help them reintegrate into society. So imagine having that profession way before the profession of social work was ever created. And then you had on the care team, the religious leader. Today, we might call this the hospital chaplain, right? The person who went around and rotated, right, kind of rounded with the team in order to round on each and every patient. And then while the doctor was given his advice and the nurse was doing his or her thing and the doctor, you know, each person was given, the religious advisor was giving what? Wa'adh, or religious advice to that person as well. This holistic kind of treatment model is like amazing how this was created and developed and very much inspired by Islam. And you don't find it anywhere else, definitely not in this period of history of the world. And you don't find it for centuries and centuries and centuries later until you get to Europe, right? Way after us. And there's a lot of question on where they got that from if it wasn't from us, right? SubhanAllah. So, you know, I want to tell you this about this Islamic history, not to bore you with a history lesson, but to tell you, for me, this was a game changer. For me, this was something that was like, okay, khalas, like I'm going to throw away all that stigma and all this internalized stigma against psychology and mental health. And I'm not going to embrace this wholesale. I'm not just going to like take this whole thing and be like, it's all good and great. No. I'm not going to go to that extreme because there's some really problematic things with psychology, but I'm also not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? That there's parts of this that work and parts of it that don't. And I have to figure out what actually works with Islam and is part of our tradition. Because if our noble predecessors saw this, were inspired by Islam to create this, and this is our heritage and our legacy, then why are Muslims so at the very end of the discussion of the mental health when they should really be, according to our legacy, right, at the very forefront of this discussion?